I'm sorry. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Livestock and Foreign Agriculture to review reauthorization of the Livestock Mandatory Reporting Act will come to order. I'd like to welcome our witnesses to this discussion regarding reauthorization of the Livestock Mandatory Reporting Act. First enacted in 1999, the Act was developed in response to changing markets with an increasing number of animals being sold via marketing agreements under which prices were not publicly disclosed. As these structural changes continued, livestock producers requested that the then voluntary price reporting mechanism be made mandatory. Thus, the resulting act mandated price reporting for live cattle, boxed beef, and live swine, and it allowed USDA to establish mandatory price reporting for lamb sales as well. Development of the act and each subsequent reauthorization has ultimately involved and required consensus between producers and packers for implementation to work as smoothly as possible. As we approach the expiration of the current law, we have once again asked producers and packers to work towards consensus regarding any requested modifications to the underlying statute. We are aware that discussions have been ongoing and that while we are very close to a final package of requests, some further discussion may be necessary prior to announcing a markup of the reauthorization bill. Proposals have been shared between and among the various stakeholder groups, and those proposals have been forwarded to the committee for review. As consensus is reached, the committee will prepare draft bill text to be circulated among members with the intent to post that legislation for public review later this week or early next week. Today, we have invited representatives of the affected livestock organizations, as well as a representative of the Packers Trade Association, NAMI, to share their proposals, identify areas of consensus, and to identify areas of concern. I would note that a representative of the USDA Agriculture Marketing Service, the agency which administers mandatory price reporting, was originally invited to testify today. We have been in discussions with the Secretary's office, and it was the preference of the department to focus its effort on more detailed briefings and technical assistance on the legislative draft as opposed to testifying on today's witness panel. That said, I'm pleased that Dr. Craig Morris, Deputy Administrator of the Agriculture Marketing Service with direct responsibility for the livestock, poultry, and seed program, is here today and is prepared to answer any questions that members may have. Again, I'd like to thank our witnesses for their attendance, and I now yield to Ranking Member Mr. Costa for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important that this subcommittee do its due diligence in this matter that I think is very important to America's livestock industry and to the cattle producers throughout our nation. I have a very significant cattle producing effort that takes place in California. I've got 3 packing operations that are nearby or within my district, and I work closely with all of them, including the cattle producers of California, to ensure that they can remain competitive and thriving, because these are some of the hardest working people you ever meet, and they are tenacious, and they deal with the ups and downs in what sometimes is a volatile market. Yet they not only produce the finest products of beef anywhere in the country, but they also export a significant portion of their product. The price reporting for livestock and meat was made mandatory some 15 years ago. And the goal of providing buyers and sellers with accurate and objective information is always the goal to ensure for a competitive market for whether we're talking about cattle or hogs or sheep or wholesale meat products. And obviously in different regions of the country, these livestock producers make up significant parts of the economy in those regions. Despite the initial opposition, this has become a tool, and American agriculture, agriculturalists, farmers, cattle operators, dairymen, and the rest of the gamut of the we say the Barnyard Coalition, needs all the tools that they can have available to them, not only in this country, but to compete in what becomes more and more a global market. Since livestock mandatory price reporting has become a tool, these reporting have had and continue to have significant impacts because contracts are negotiated between buyers and sellers. They're based on prices that are reported by the Livestock Mandatory Reporting to the Agricultural Marketing Services. And obviously, these markets are critical to the viability of a important ability to keep their game. And also, there's future markets that have ramifications as well. We saw this during the October 13 shutdown as the program was not deemed essential during one of the government shutdowns. There was a loss of price data that caused major headaches. At least my folks told me they had major headaches in the market throughout the country. These sort of disruptions can be prevented by not shutting down government, but in the event it happens, clearly we need to make sure that the flow of information remains uninterrupted. It's my hope that we can build on these bipartisan efforts that the industry has come to expect with regards to mandatory price reporting reauthorizations. I'm looking forward to hearing the testimony from each of you who represent various segments of the industry, and I will listen very carefully back home because as a colleague of ours once said, Mr. Chairman, all politics are local. And so I'm going to obviously want to know what my local folks think as it relates to both those packing operations as well as the feedlot operations as well as the producers who literally and figuratively, put the meat on the table. So with that, I give back the balance of my time and I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses.
Thank you much. The chair would request that other members, when they arrive, submit their opening statements for the record so the witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure there's ample time for questions. The chair would like to remind everyone that members in particular, they will be recognized for questioning in the order of seniority for members who were present at the start of the hearing. Well, that's going to be easy for me. After that, members will be recognized in order of their arrival. And certainly appreciate members' understanding on that front. Witnesses are asked to limit their oral presentations to 5 minutes. All written statements will be included in the record. And now I want to introduce our panel of witnesses and certainly welcome you to the table and appreciate your willingness to come before the committee today. First, I want to introduce Mr. Mark Dopp, Senior Vice President, Regulatory Affairs and Scientific Affairs, as well as General Counsel for the North American Meat Institute here in Washington. Mr. James Hammerl, and forgive me if I mispronounce the name, you can correct me at the appropriate time, but he is here on behalf of the National Pork Producers Council. And also would like to introduce Mr. Burton Flieger, President of the American Sheep Industry Association from Colorado. Mr. Ed Griman, Chairman of the Cattle Marketing and International Trade Committee, National Cattlemen's Beef Association from Garner, Iowa. And then, as I mentioned, Dr. Craig Morris is here. He's not part of the panel, but here for questions if members have any. Deputy Administrator, Livestock, Poultry and Seed Program, Agriculture Marketing Service, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. With that, Mr. Dopp, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Costa, and other members of the committee. My name is Mark Dopp, and I am the Senior Vice President and General Counsel of the North American Meat Institute. The Meat Institute, as we now brand ourselves, which came into being on January 1 of this year, and is the result of a merger of the American Meat Institute and the North American Meat Association. Collectively, our organization and its predecessors have been representing the nation's meat and poultry industries for more than 100 years. The Meat Institute's members include 376 of the nation's largest and smallest meat and poultry food manufacturers. Collectively, my members produce 95% of the beef, pork, veal, and lamb products, and 75% of the turkey products produced in the United States. Among the Meat Institute's member companies, more than 80% are small, family-owned businesses employing fewer than 300 people. These companies operate, compete, sometimes struggle, and mostly thrive in what has become one of the toughest, most competitive, and most scrutinized sectors of our economy, meat packing and processing. Meat Institute member companies worked closely with the livestock producer community, the Agricultural Marketing Service, and other interested stakeholders when this reporting program first came into being. And we've worked similarly on every reauthorization since then. This iteration of the reauthorization should be no different. In that regard, the Meat Institute has been working with its membership and with the livestock producer community to find consensus on reauthorizing the Livestock Mandatory Reporting Act, and I hope that we can continue this partnership in moving this legislation forward free of controversy, and I believe we can. Although there is work yet to be done to reach consensus, I am confident we can achieve this goal in a manner that makes the program more effective, more efficient, and without increasing the costs or regulatory burdens. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this hearing, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dopp. Mr. Heimer?
Thank you, Chairman Rouzer, Ranking Member Costa, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to testify on the Livestock Mandatory Reporting Act. I'm Jim Heimer, a hog farmer from Ohio and a member of the Board of Directors for the National Pork Producers Council, here testifying on behalf of the NPPC and American 68,000 pork producers. The mandatory price reporting system for hogs and pork is one of the most important services the U.S. government provides to the U.S. pork industry, providing essential marketing information used every day by pork producers, packers, and users of pork to price the products they buy and sell. As you know, Livestock Mandatory Reporting Act expires September 30th this year. Before that date, pork producers would like Congress to approve legislation reauthorizing the law for 5 years. Pork producers also would like 3 important additions or changes to the mandatory price reporting system. First, create a category for negotiated formula pricings to better reflect the total number of hogs negotiated each day, regardless of how buyers and sellers arrive at the prices. The original reporting specified 4 types of purchases for hogs: negotiated swine or pork market formula, other market formula, and other purchase agreements. USDA established for each category criteria they have stayed fairly consistent, providing a known set of rules for industry participants. The market, however, has changed dramatically over the past 15 years, with the most notable changes being the decline in proportion of hog sales conducted through negotiated trades. Today, less than 4% of the hogs are sold in negotiated or cash markets, and the number sold under some alternative marketing agreements continues to increase. The mandatory pricing system has adapted those changes with one exception, that hogs are not committed to any packer on a long-term basis and whose price is determined by a formula negotiated on a lot-by-lot basis. USDA doesn't consider such sales in negotiated trades. They are included in a swine or pork market formula category. NPPC believes that the market will be better reflected by placing those animals in a separate category that reflects the true number of hogs and the prices of those hogs sold through negotiations each day. Whether or not these negotiations result in a numerical price or an agreement on how such a price will be established at delivery. NPPC doesn't know exactly how many hogs will fall in this new category, but feedback from market participants suggests it would be 2 to 4% of the total. This is not a lot, but it would represent a 50 to 100% increase in the number of negotiated hogs. The second change is to give USDA authority to include late-day hog purchase in the following day's morning and afternoon reports to better represent the subsequent day's market conditions. One problem from diminishing number of hogs sold through negotiated trade is the USDA's confidentiality conditions for publishing information. That is, that the sellers and the buyers not be able to be identified are now often not met for morning and afternoon purchase swine reports. But when that data isn't published, producers and packers don't know what is going on in the marketplace beyond their own actions and trades, so have no frame of reference for market conditions. NBPC believes that hogs and purchases after the 1 p.m. reporting deadline are in almost every instance delivered the following day and thus affect the next day's market. But those animals are not included in the next day's morning or afternoon reports. Including them would reflect the current day's markets more clearly and add to the number of trades and total volume of trades that are submitted to the USDA for reports. This would reduce the probability of violating USDA's confidentiality conditions and increase the likelihood that USDA will publish complete reports. The third change would be to recognize that mandatory price reporting systems is an absolute essential to the U.S. pork industry and ensure reports are published during any government shutdown. The price reporting system has established USDA as the authority on daily pricing and supply of hogs. The agency price reports, which have been published now for 15 years, are the essential information source for the U.S. pork industry. While they survived on the October 2013 government shutdown when USDA stopped publishing price reports, pork producers did so very uncomfortably with a lot of uncertainty. The uncertainty about supplies and prices nearly caused significant disagreements over the values of pork products and hogs. Had the shutdown continued, NPPC believes there would have been major disruptions in commerce and lingering legal challenges to actions taken by packers and producers during the information void. To avoid that, NPPC requests language to be included in reauthorization legislation deeming mandatory price reporting an essential service, or that the committee take other action to ensure price reports are published during a shutdown or lapse in appropriation. Finally, NPPC opposes any new legislation or regulations that would restrict marketing opportunities for pork producers, and it opposes any government intervention into hog markets unless such action addresses a clear and unequivocal instance of market failure or abuse of market power. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss mandatory pricing and the reporting system. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Flieger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for the opportunity to speak to you today. I am Burton Flieger, a sheep producer from North Dakota and president of the American Sheep Industry Association, the oldest national livestock association in America, dating back to 1865 and celebrating our 150th year representing farmers and ranchers of America. Livestock mandatory reporting is very important to our industry, and we strongly urge Congress to reauthorize the LMR Act before September 30th, 2015. The sheep industry has experienced consolidation, and the processing sector has become more concentrated. One dynamic that is different in our industry compared to beef and pork is that imported lamb makes up fully 1/2 of what is available to the U.S. consumer today. This fact alone makes LMR data critically important to our industry. Another difference is the statutory authority regarding lamb in LMR Act is only one sentence long and provides USDA with much discretion in providing price reporting information. ASI commissioned a study of LMR for lamb to find out what was working, what needed to be improving. In December 2012, the Livestock Marketing Information Center delivered a report to us. I am submitting a copy for the record. We are also submitting the final set of recommendations we provided to USDA AMS. Many of these issues raised in the report are very important to ASI, and we are optimistically confident that USDA will include these changes in the final regulations. In the interest of maintaining USDA's broad discretionary authority to implement mandatory price reporting for the lamb, we are not requesting statutory authority requiring USDA to implement these many changes. However, there are a few that direction to USDA either statutorily or in report language would be most helpful. Briefly, at the top of our list of enhancements that are needed for LMR reporting for lamb are, number one, lower the reporting threshold for imported and domestic lamb. As I mentioned earlier, half of the lamb sold in America is imported, and with the current reporting thresholds, we do not have a reasonable market test of many of the cuts of imported lamb. Secondly, revise the confidentiality rule that are in place and provide some alternative methods for reporting prices as the processing sector becomes more concentrated. One of the cases where LMR reporting on lamb was not available was due to one firm not voluntarily agreeing to report data during a lapse in statutory authority, or reauthorization, with the 370-20 rule being applied. This incident demonstrated to us how close our industry operates with the 370-20 rule. Surely there must be ways to protect confidentiality, yet provide the full intent of LMR as we look ahead to how business and market dynamics may change now and into the future. Thirdly, revise the definition of packer-owned and build some flexibility into the regulation that will provide for price reporting as marketing arrangements change within the industry. Today, about 30% of the U.S. lambs are processed by one cooperative, and because of the intricacies of their business model, USDA will not allow LMR on these lambs, even though they are recorded transactions and the cooperative wants to report. And finally, to ensure that USDA has the ability to issue reports even during times of lapse in appropriations, such as an emergency furlough. In summary, Mr. Chairman, we urge reauthorization of the LMR Act prior to September 30th so that there will not be a lapse in price reporting. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Greiman?
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Costa, my name is Ed Greiman. I'm a cattleman from Iowa. I am also chair of NCBA's Cattle Marketing and International Trade Committee. I have led our efforts on discussing mandatory price reporting over the past 4 years. We have spent those years looking at price discovery and the overall market conditions we are seeing across the country. The bottom line is that MPR is an important tool for overall market transparency, and we support its reauthorization. NCBA is a strong supporter of mandatory price reporting because it is a valuable tool to cattle producers who rely on it to get a feel for what their cattle may be worth. It allows them to formulate their marketing plan. The cattle price transparency that comes from mandatory price reporting is an important component in formulating price discovery as well as enhancing competition in the marketplace. While NCBA is supportive of reauthorizing mandatory price reporting, we would like to see mandatory price reporting made an essential function of government, so the reports will continue in the event of another government shutdown. These reports have significant impact on the bottom line for many of our producers. To go without them leaves producers in a situation where it is much harder to understand what is taking place in the market. As an owner and manager of a relatively small beef operation, I am not engaged in the beef market 100% of the time. The beef market is a complex and volatile place. Prices are influenced not only by supply and demand of beef, but also by the world economy. With a market so diverse, it is hard to stay up on the current prices of beef and fed cattle. The market information supplied by NPR is valuable in that it gives me the ability to make informed decisions. Many smaller producers do not have the exposure to the daily complexities of cattle trade. There are times in a year that I am looking at opportunities to sell a large portion of my fed cattle to a packer. At these times, I need to be able to reference what has been done by other producers and packers and to get an understanding of what the market is looking at. Though the information is very general in nature, it gives me a starting point to evaluate from. Mandatory price reporting allows all cattle producers a chance to competitively sell into this complex market. Twice a year, I find myself having to sell cull cows from our cow-calf side of the operation. Our cows are above average, so selling directly to the packer is advantageous. However, when one only visits this marketplace twice a year, it is impossible to stay in touch. Mandatory price reporting allows me to get a bid from a packer, then take a look at past marketings to see if it is competitive. Mandatory price reporting doesn't necessarily get me more money, but it allows free access to the information and more fair trade. In summary, NCBA strongly supports reauthorization of mandatory price reporting, and we look forward to working with you to further improve the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move into a period of questions. Members will have 5 minutes apiece to ask questions of their choice. I'm going to start with Mr. Dopp with the Meat Institute. Can you shed some light on the nature and substance of the discussions that the Meat Institute has held with livestock producers regarding reauthorization?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we've had an opportunity to meet with representatives of all three industries so far, and have looked at some concept papers, in at least one instance, some draft legislative language, but that's pretty much been the extent to it.
Do you all have an opinion regarding the substance of the livestock producer group's proposals as a whole?
We have had an opportunity to converse with our members about some of these concepts. Some of the ideas that have been advanced, we have no objection to, and there are some that are troubling.
Which ones do you find troubling?
Well, Mr. Chairman, there are a couple ideas that have been advanced by folks, the cattle industry. And if I told you I understood all of the nuances of the proposal, that would be untrue. One of the things I learned when I had the opportunity to participate in how this, the origins of the statute, the framework back in 1999, I spent a lot of time, as did some other people in the room, putting this together. And then again, when we worked through the negotiated rulemaking process for wholesale pork cuts, all of this is extremely complicated. So if you are looking for me to explain to you all of the nuances and issues that are attendant to that, I'm a food and drug lawyer. I am not the person who buys pork. I am not a person who buys hogs or buys cattle. So I would be unable to answer that question if that's what you're asking.
We all have our areas of expertise, I understand. Mr. Homrell, as a North Carolina native, and of course I represent southeastern North Carolina, and more specifically, I have a couple of the top hog-producing counties in the country. In fact, I wanted to ask a few questions regarding the pork industry's provisions that you're looking at. Does the pork industry proposal to add a purchase category for negotiated formula sales and purchases present any problems for the industry as a whole?
No, none at all. We think it would be a very advantageous to the industry, and the market outlook would be great for us to do that.
Along those lines, does the pork industry proposal to add a provision to include late-day purchases and subsequent days reporting present any problems for the industry?
No, we think it would be a great opportunity. It would help on our confidentiality and have more pigs come to the market and have a better market, have more market opportunities for us to use.
Can you also elaborate a bit on how on how adding a purchase agreement or purchase category for negotiated formula sales and purchases would better serve the pork industry?
Yeah, we think that would add, like I said in the report, I think it would add at least 2 to 4% more by adding those hogs that are being missed under negotiated. We definitely need to have more negotiated hogs that have a more proven market for each day for us to trade with. And by adding that to that column, we would pick up another 50 to 100%. Not that's a big number, but that's a projection we have. So we think we could double the amount of hogs that's going into that column.
I will yield back my time and turn to Mr. Costa if he has some questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You know, I was listening to our gentleman from Iowa and was reminded of how much our industries have changed. I mean, the collective representation that you have there, I'm more familiar with the cattle industry and the poultry industry in California than I am with the hog industry. But just the way, I mean, the video markets that take place daily, in which a lot of cattle is traded, is far different than 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Mr. Dopp, can you discuss what the cost is to your industry for the different reporting requirements? Has NAMI done a survey on that, and how you look at it in terms of the breakdown of the costs and evaluate it?
Mr. Costa, we have not done that analysis. What I can tell you is that when the program was initiated, I mean, the statute was originally enacted in 1999. It probably took a couple years, if I remember correctly, for the rulemaking process to finish. I know this, the companies that are required to report, that initial investment, that initial capital investment, if you will, was several $1 million, I'm sure, for the companies that, I mean, they had to reconfigure their computer programs. There are, I'm sure, some ongoing costs because, if I remember correctly, with some degree of regularity, and Dr. Morris probably knows better than I, the agency occasionally makes some software changes and other changes such that companies have to adjust accordingly. What those numbers are at this point, I can't tell you. We haven't done the economic analysis at this point. It's 15 years after the fact, and those costs are sunk.
No, I understand. That's why I want to go back and get some information from my local folks to see what suggestions that they might have as well. Tell me, during the government shutdown, and you know, a lot of us were very frustrated during that whole time process. It should have never happened. It was irresponsible. But having said that, what happened within the industry? Did you evaluate the impacts and when those services were deemed not essential, and how it dealt with the lack of information that has been provided now for 15 years?
Well, if you're asking, again, whether any sort of economic analysis was done, the answer is no, at least not by us. What I can tell you is that, I mean, I think everybody needs to remember, not only do not only does the producer community not have access to that information, the packers who are required to report not only what they pay for their livestock, but also what they receive for the boxed product in either beef or pork. Many of their sales, their customer relationships are also tied to this information. So I think it's fair to say, at least from my opinion, the producer and the packer processor community were sort of operating in the dark collectively.
For that period of time. Mr. Gurman, do you care to comment? I mean, you're kind of where the rubber meets the road, as you described your own circumstance.
Yeah, I can comment on the government shutdown. In working with a packer right now, and currently our operation is sending cattle out there to one of the packers on what we call a grid. And so I'm getting paid based on the value of the cattle and what they're worth to the packer. Those cattle are also going into a branded product line. And so when you do that, I'm buying these cattle 6 to 8 months ahead of a time, knowing that they're going to go to that packer, and we've already agreed on a formula to price them, which at that point in time was the Nebraska weighted average. When we no longer receive the Nebraska weighted average, all of a sudden we're kind of in limbo, because these cattle are still going to market, the trade's still going on, the packers are still taking cattle, and I'm still delivering.
You operate through a feedlot, Mark?
Yeah, these were operated through a feedlot, but I also still have the cow-calf, and so these
Do you have a cow-calf operation?
We have both. Yes, we have both. Yes. So at that point in time, all of a sudden, we had to have a phone call in terms of how are we going to price these cattle. It's okay to do that maybe for 1 week with a government shutdown to say, okay, we're not going to have a third-party verification of how these cattle be priced. So we had to agree on a price, but all of a sudden, the branded products like that kind of find themselves in limbo, because I'm committed to deliver the cattle, they're committed to take them, but we don't know how to price them.
Yeah. Well, it just kind of shows, as I said earlier, the complexity and how much has changed over the last 10, 15 years. And for some of your operators, some of the folks in my area that have markets in Asia, obviously this has an impact there, because we have product that, you got a customer and you want to satisfy your customer. And it all comes together. My time's expired, Mr. Chairman, but I thank the witnesses, and if we have another round, I'll take another shot at them.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. I want to recognize the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler, if she has any comments or any questions that she might have.
Sure. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. And as a pork producer most of my life and a person that's raising cattle, cow-calf operation today, this is certainly an important topic for all of us. And in Missouri's 4th District, we have a lot of cattle, a lot of livestock of all kinds. Just quickly, does anyone on the panel not support timely reauthorization of Livestock Mandatory Reporting Act? Okay, we're all on board. I thought so, but wanted to verify that. And we are aware that there have been ongoing negotiations within and between each of the industry groups represented here today. So of the proposals that have been highlighted, are there any that are problematic for any of your organizations? could this be a non-controversial issue here on Capitol Hill? Mr. Chairman, this would be amazing. My last question goes to Mr. Flieger. Your testimony suggests that the committee consider requiring a USDA report 1 year prior to the next reauthorization date that would provide recommendations on how to, quote, better and more inclusively accomplish price reporting in the current industry and market environment. So I was just wondering, has that suggestion been included as a part of your proposal for reauthorization? And do you have any particular issues in mind that you hope would be addressed by the report?
This recommendation that has not been part of our discussions but was developed as we prepared our testimony, we would ask that the committee consider the inclusion of the report a requirement in order to better focus on all the parties' needs and the improvements for mandatory price reporting to the reauthorization. 3 years ago, ASI commissioned a study by the Livestock Marketing Information Center to review MRP, how it could be improved. ASI spent about 18 months working with AMS addressing the recommendations from the study, from which have not been finalized. The LMIC report and ASI's final report as a result of this process are being submitted for part of the record. Many of the LMIC recommendations are not included in the ASI statutory reauthorization to the committee, but because we are still hopeful and expect USDA to implement some of these recommendations. However, there is no assurance that USDA will. For instance, one of our more important issues that we believe should be addressed is ASI's or AMS's some flexibility in how prices are reported for the modern marketing arrangements between packers and producers, and how this change interprets the packer-owned category. For example, one U.S. firm is marketing arrangement with producers who owns the lambs all the way through, from the producer through the wholesaler to the retail product. And this firm handles about 1/3 of the lambs in this country. And yet they're not allowed to report that lamb, even though the prices are recorded, because of the AMS's definition of the packer. So if USDA is required to issue a report in consultation with the industry, all interested parties would have a much better view of where the issues stand prior to reauthorization, and which in turn would allow the committee to focus on these issues needing attention.
Sounds good. Could you please get the committee that language that you would like to have included in there? Could you get us the information that you would like to have included, the language?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yield back.
I'll yield to Mr. Costa.
Thank you very much. Just a couple quick questions here, Mr. Chairman. To Dr. Morris, as we discussed earlier, the industries that are testifying here this afternoon have changed dramatically in the last 15 years in terms of the processing, the marketing, also, you know, the markets that drive so much of the technology. The United States Department of Agriculture provides a great deal of information that I think provides an important role. Could you talk about some of the data that is being reported under this program to give, I think, members of the subcommittee here a sense of just how significant this information is that you provide?
You bet. Livestock Mandatory Reporting Program is a very powerful tool. It unlike the market reporting activities the department carries out for the vast majority of the other commodities, which are collected through voluntary means, the LMR program requires essentially the nation's largest beef packers, pork packers, lamb packers, and lamb importers to transmit to USDA up to several times per day all of their purchases of livestock and sales of meat, in the case of importers, the imported product. In terms of what we're capturing, we're right now publishing through the LMR program fully 80% of the slaughter cattle in the United States, fully 93% of the boxed beef trade in the United States, fully 94% of the hog slaughtered in the United States, 56% of the lamb slaughtered in the United States, 46% of the boxed lamb meat that enters commerce, and 87% of the wholesale pork that enters commerce. We communicate that information to producers through 62 different daily reports and 47...
In real time?
In virtually real time. It's within an hour of the time that we receive the information. We're able to, we've made an investment in an IT system that then compiles that data. We have trained market news reporters that then review that data to look for anomalies.
Which gives the cattleman, which gives the feedlot operator, which gives the packer, all important information in terms of how they best deal with their product.
Absolutely true. And it depends on the commodity in question, but certainly on one extreme, you'd have the swine industry that we aren't really reporting a price of what has occurred as often is the case with the market reports we put out. The prices we are publishing actually derive the price for those livestock going to market.
From the USDA's perspective, do you have a comment with regards to the impacts that the market felt as a result of the government shutdown and this important service deemed as not essential?
Without question, price discovery in the livestock sector was significantly impacted by the 17-day loss of data due to the shutdown. The brunt of the impact, we believe, was clearly the unavailability of market news data for producers, growers, small farmers. Producers effectively had no market price information to determine the value for their livestock, which are perishable commodities. When animals are ready for market, they really need to be shipped at that point.
I'm glad you underlined that, because so much of what we produce in America, sadly, I think, the consumer thinks it comes from the grocery store. Mm-hmm. And these are all perishable items that have a limited shelf life in the market, in the store that they purchase these at. And the perishable nature is an important part of this all.
The entire system is built upon the fact that they're ready for market at a certain time.
Well, I have some other questions, Mr. Chairman, that are more of a technical nature that I'd like to submit to the USDA at the appropriate time. I'll do that, and I'll yield back the balance of my time. And I thank you for holding this hearing, and we'll take information not only from our witnesses this afternoon, but I'll go back home and ask my folks if they got any other thoughts on how we can, build a better mousetrap, so to speak. We hope to, I'm certain that we'll see bipartisan effort on this legislation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Costa. I'll now yield to Mr. Newhouse if he has any comments and/or questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Short on comments, but just a couple of questions. So thank you. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. First, I wanted to start with a fellow farmer. And I'm sorry I wasn't here for part of the testimony, but so if you've covered this in other questions, but my apologies. But could you pronounce your name for me? Hamo? Many number of producers in my state probably fall in the same category that you do, as being a rancher that you described as relatively small operation. So could you help me understand and by describing from your perspective the benefits you may see in a mandatory price reporting system, and also maybe on the converse side, what issues you could see that would better improve the system to make it better for small operations?
Well, mandatory pricing system is, to me, an absolute. If you go back to the voluntary, it was kind of one-sided. Whatever the packer or the person that was recording it wanted to give and take, I guess. Mandatory, it gives all cuts, and all the records are all kept as needed, and I guess I should say are authenticated. And when it was a voluntary, we didn't know what we were getting. We sometimes you only got what people wanted you to hear, I guess. Under mandatory, we know that it is a reliable source. The voluntary, you go back before '99, it was probably whatever the person wanted to trade in or give the information to. So I don't think there's anything but mandatory we can accept in this day and age to be acceptable. To update it and make it better, we have worked as a group here and with AMS and saying that there's things that different reports, as we brought in a report today, 3 different items we'd like to, besides, I guess I should say, the one that it is an essential thing we have to have. We can't afford another shutdown within the system as we did in 2013. But there's several things we always can tweak to go into the future because markets do change. But I think as far as different reports, we want the 24-hour report to make it into the next day reporting and things like that. There's always tweaking we can do as the markets change through modernization and so forth and new markets coming forward. But I think mandatory is the only way we can go. It's just an absolute for us in our business.
Good, thank you very much. I think, Mr. Dopp, if you could perhaps put on your consumer hat and speak from the perspective of what kinds of benefits American shoppers could anticipate under a mandatory price reporting system.
Well, I guess I look at it this way. The greater the transparency in terms of what the producer, the information that the producer gathers, the information that the packer processor gathers, and the information, frankly, that my members, customers gather, hopefully provides for a more efficient, more effective marketplace, and hopefully that results in lower prices to the consumer. And that's what this system, I believe, is intended to create. That all flows to ultimately it's supposed to flow to the benefit of the consumer, I believe. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, I think
Thank
so.
you.
Yeah, thank you. And then quickly, Dr. Morris, could you talk specifically about what steps are taken to protect buyer and seller identity in the price reporting process?
We're required under statute to protect the confidentiality of those packers that are required, and lamb importers that are required to report. We basically subject all the information that we receive to a statistical test that was referenced earlier in the testimony that ensures that. That's withstood external review from a variety of groups. We have worked closely as especially the sheep industry has seen consolidation in the packing sector in the firms that are required to report to see if there are modifications that can be made to that, and we're willing to look into those issues for sure. Mandatory price reporting is a very powerful tool. You are, to those firms that are required to report, exposing essentially all of their business practices. As Mr. Dopp referenced, hopefully that brings a much more efficient and effective marketplace to the benefit of consumers. But it's incumbent on us to ensure that that information also protects the business interests of those packers, which are required to essentially disclose information that other market participants are not.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the opportunity. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. Unless my friend Mr. Costa has another question, perhaps, I'm going to say a few closing remarks and then yield to Mr. Costa for any closing remarks he may have. Let me just thank all the witnesses for your willingness to come before the committee today. Appreciate your willingness to work in good faith on this issue. It's very important that we work together and packer and producer and everybody at the table do everything possible to come to a consensus that is a win-win across the board. And I think we're well on our way to that. Still have a little bit of work to do, but look forward to clearing that hurdle soon. And I just appreciate and commend you for your dedication and your willingness to work with us to get this reauthorization underway. Mr. Costa, I'll yield to you if you have any closing comment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank you and members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing. I think it's our important role as the Committee of Oversight to provide the due diligence to gather the information, to provide the reauthorization. I look forward to working with you on this important legislation to America's livestock industry. And I thank the witnesses for your testimony, and we'll continue to work together. Thank you very much.
Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. This subcommittee on livestock and foreign agriculture hearing is now adjourned.